The smell of fresh bread filled the small kitchen as Walter Grimm pulled the loaf from the oven. His hands shook slightly, not from age, but from the arthritis that had bothered him for the past 10 years. He set the bread on the counter and wiped his flour-covered fingers on his worn apron. Behind him, curled near the wood stove, a small dragon lifted her head and sniffed the air. I know, Walter said without turning around. You can smell it from across the room. The dragon, no bigger than a large dog, stretched her wings and yawned. Her scales shimmered in shades of deep red and orange, catching the morning light that streamed through the kitchen window. She made a soft chirping sound and padded across the floor, her claws clicking against the old wooden boards. Walter tore off a piece of bread and tossed it to her. She caught it mid-air and swallowed it whole, then sat at his feet looking up expectantly. That's all you get before breakfast, he said firmly. You know the rules, Cinder. The dragon huffed, sending a small puff of smoke from her nostrils. Walter chuckled and scratched behind her ear ridges, right where she liked it. She leaned into his touch, her body radiating a gentle warmth that always reminded him of a well-tended fire point 15 years. That's how long Cinder had been part of his life. Walter could still remember the day he found her egg, nestled in a crack between two volcanic rocks during a geological survey up in the highlands. The egg had been warm to the touch, almost hot. He should have reported it, should have turned it over to the colony's science division. Instead, he'd wrapped it in his jacket and brought it home. Anna had been alive then. His wife had taken one look at the egg and smiled that knowing smile of hers. You always did bring home strays, she'd said. 3 weeks later, the egg hatched, and their quiet retirement became a lot less quiet. Walter moved to the window and looked out at his farm. 20 acres of decent land on the outskirts of New Haven, the main settlement on Ashwood Ridge. He grew vegetables mostly, some grain, enough to keep himself busy and trade for supplies in town. The work was harder now than it used to be, but Cinder helped. She could dig furrows with her claws faster than any plow, and her body heat kept the greenhouse warm even during the cold season. Beyond his property line, he could see his nearest neighbor's farm about a mile away. Smoke rose from their chimney in a thin gray line. Everything looked normal, peaceful, the way it had looked every morning for the past 40 years since the colony was first established. But something felt different today. Walter squinted at the sky. The usual pale blue seemed darker somehow, though he couldn't say why. He pressed his face closer to the glass, searching for what had caught his attention. There, high up, barely visible against the clouds. 3 dark shapes that definitely weren't birds. Ships. His chest tightened. Ashwood Ridge didn't get much traffic. Supply freighters came once a month, maybe a private vessel here and there. But 3 ships at once? And they weren't moving like freighters. They hung in the upper atmosphere, perfectly still, like predators watching prey. Cinder appeared at his side, standing on her hind legs to look out the window. She made a low growling sound deep in her throat. You see them too, girl? Walter murmured. The old communication unit on his kitchen counter beeped. Walter hobbled over to it and pressed the receive button. Old Bob's weathered face appeared on the small screen. Walter, you watching the sky? Old Bob asked without preamble. Robert Hughes had been the colony administrator for 20 years and rarely wasted words. Just spotted them, Walter replied. What are they? Got a transmission about an hour ago. Official channels. Old Bob's expression was grim. It's the sovereign mandate. They're here for what they call integration proceedings. Walter felt his blood run cold. He'd heard of the sovereign mandate. Everyone in the outer colonies had heard of them. They were an empire that had been expanding steadily for the past 50 years, swallowing up independent worlds one by one. They didn't conquer with armies, at least not at first. They came with bureaucrats and legal documents and integration treaties that somehow always ended with the empire owning everything. What do they want? Walter asked, though he already knew the answer. Everything, Old Bob said flatly. They're sending down representatives tomorrow. Every property owner needs to prepare for inspection and inventory. They'll be cataloging all assets, resources, and he paused, his eyes shifting away from the screen, any exotic or rare biological specimens. Walter's hand instinctively moved to rest on Cinder's head. She leaned against his leg, her warmth seeping through his pants. "I see," Walter said carefully. "Thanks for the heads up, Bob." "Walter," old Bob's voice dropped lower. "If there's anything on your property that might be considered valuable to them, anything at all, you need to think real careful about your next moves." The screen went dark. Walter stood in his kitchen, hands still resting on Cinder's head, staring at the blank display. Through the window, the three ships remained motionless against the sky. He'd known this day might come eventually. You couldn't keep a dragon's secret forever. Not really. But he'd hoped for more time. He'd hoped the galaxy would just forget about this little corner of space and let him live out his remaining years in peace. Cinder chirped softly and nuzzled his hand. Walter looked down at her, at the creature who had kept him company through Anna's final illness, who had given him a reason to get up every morning after his wife passed, who had become as much family to him as any person ever had. "They're not taking you," he said quietly. "I don't care what laws they have or what rights they think they own. You're staying right here with me." The dragon looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too intelligent for a simple animal. Sometimes Walter wondered how much she actually understood. More than most people gave her credit for, he suspected. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old farmhouse windows. The three ships still hung in the sky, silent and waiting. Walter knew that by this time tomorrow, Imperial officers would be walking through New Haven, making lists and taking notes, and deciding the fate of everything and everyone on Ashwood Ridge. He had maybe 24 hours to figure out how to protect Cinder. 24 hours to outsmart an empire that had conquered dozens of worlds. Walter Grimm was 73 years old. His hands shook when he tried to write, and his knees hurt when it rained. But he'd been a combat engineer in the first expansion wars before he retired to this farm. He'd built bridges under enemy fire and dismantled explosive devices with steady hands. He'd survived things that should have killed him a dozen times over. And he'd be damned if he let some Imperial bureaucrats take his dragon. "Come on, girl," he said, moving toward the door. "We've got work to do." Cinder followed him out into the yard, where the morning sun was just beginning to warm the fields, and the ships overhead cast long shadows across the land. The town hall meeting lasted 3 hours and accomplished exactly nothing. Walter sat in the back row, listening to his neighbors argue and panic and make suggestions that ranged from reasonable to completely insane. Some wanted to negotiate with the Empire. Others wanted to pack up and flee into the wilderness. A few hot-headed young folks even talked about fighting back. Old Bob stood at the front of the room, trying to maintain order and failing. The administrator looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His usually neat gray hair stuck up in several directions, and his shirt was wrinkled, which Walter had never seen before. "Please, everyone, just calm down," old Bob said for what must have been the 20th time. "Panicking won't help anyone." "Easy for you to say," someone shouted from the middle rows. "You don't have anything they'd want." That wasn't entirely true, but Walter kept quiet. He was there to listen, not to draw attention to himself. Betty Reeves sat down in the empty chair next to him. The former militia captain was in her 60s now, her dark hair more salt than pepper, but she still carried herself like a soldier. She'd lost her left arm below the elbow in some conflict Walter had never asked about. The prosthetic she wore now was simple but functional. "How's the dragon?" Betty whispered. Walter gave her a sharp look. "What dragon? Don't play dumb with me, Walter. I've seen the scorch marks on your barn door. I've heard her at night when the wind's right. Half the colony knows you've got something unusual out at your place. We just never cared enough to ask questions." Walter's jaw tightened. If Betty knew, how many others knew, and how long before someone mentioned it to an Imperial inspector? "She's fine," he said finally, "and she's staying that way." Betty nodded. "Good. I'd hate to see them take her. She's part of this community, same as anyone else." She paused, watching the chaos at the front of the room. "You know they'll want to inventory everything, right? Every animal, every crop, every piece of equipment. They'll have scanners and databases and God knows what else." "I know. You got a plan." "Working on it." Betty snorted. "That's what I thought. Come by my place after this circus ends. I might have some ideas." She stood and walked away before Walter could respond. He watched her go, then turned his attention back to the meeting. Old Bob had finally gotten people to quiet down enough to share actual information. The Imperial delegation arrives tomorrow at dawn, Bob said, reading from a tablet. They'll set up a processing center in the main square. Every property owner is required to register and submit to inspection within 1 week. Failure to comply will result in, he paused, swallowing hard, immediate seizure of property and possible criminal charges. The room erupted in angry shouts again. Walter tuned it out and thought about Cinder, probably curled up by the stove back home, waiting for him to return. He'd left her plenty of food and water, but she always got anxious when he was gone too long. After the meeting finally ended, Walter made his way to Betty's house on the north side of town. She lived in a small, tidy place with a workshop out back where she repaired equipment for other colonists. The sound of metal on metal rang out as he approached. Betty looked up from the engine parts she was grinding. "Took you long enough." "Stopped at the colony archives first," Walter said. "Did some reading. Find anything useful?" Walter pulled out a small data chip. "Everything the colony has on local wildlife. Took me 2 hours to dig through it all." They went inside, and Betty made tea while Walter explained what he'd learned. The archives contained survey reports from the original colony expedition 40 years ago. One report mentioned finding evidence of volcanic reptiles in the highlands, but the species had been classified as extinct within a year of the colony's founding. No specimens had ever been captured or studied properly. So as far as official records go, creatures like Cinder don't exist on this world anymore, Betty said, understanding immediately. Right? And if they don't exist, the Empire can't claim her as a rare species. But they'll scan her. They'll know she's not just some common lizard. Walter nodded slowly. That's where it gets tricky. I need to make her seem worthless to them. Common. More trouble than she's worth. Betty thought for a moment, then started to smile. You need her to fail their tests. Exactly. They spent the next hour working out details. Betty had contacts from her militia days, people who knew how to falsify documents and create convincing backstories. She also had access to colony breeding records for various domestic animals. With some creative editing, they could make it look like Cinder was just an unusual variant of a common species, the result of failed genetic experiments or natural mutation. But the biggest problem is her behavior, Betty said. Dragons are smart. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with Cinder can tell she understands commands, respond to her name. Hell, she probably understands half of what we say. That kind of intelligence is valuable. The Empire would want her for study at minimum, exploitation at worst. Walter had been thinking about that all day. I need to train her to act stupid. Can you do that? I don't know, but I have to try. He left Betty's house as the sun was setting, his mind full of half-formed plans and desperate hopes. The walk back to his farm took longer than usual. His knees ached with every step, reminding him that he wasn't young anymore. Fighting an empire at his age seemed absurd. But the alternative was watching them take Cinder away, and that was something he simply couldn't allow. When he opened his front door, Cinder launched herself at him, nearly knocking him over. She made worried, chirping sounds and sniffed him all over, checking to make sure he was okay. "I'm fine, girl, I'm fine," he said, scratching her chin. "Just had some business in town." She calmed down but stayed close to him as he moved through the house, lighting lamps and starting a fire in the stove. Walter made a simple dinner of soup and bread, sharing pieces with Cinder as he ate. She always sat at his feet during meals, patient but hopeful. After dinner, Walter sat in his old armchair with a cup of coffee. Cinder curled up on the rug in front of him, her body radiating warmth. This was his favorite time of day, when the work was done and the house was quiet except for the crackling fire. Anna used to sit in the chair across from him, reading or knitting or just enjoying the silence. Her chair was still there, empty now for 5 years. Sometimes Walter could almost see her in it, could almost hear her voice telling him he was being stubborn or foolish or brave. "What would you think of all this?" he asked the empty chair. "Would you tell me to fight, or would you say I'm being an old fool?" The chair offered no answer, but Cinder lifted her head and looked at him with those two intelligent eyes. Walter set down his coffee and knelt on the floor next to her, ignoring the protest from his knees. He put his hand on her warm scales and felt her heartbeat, steady and strong beneath his palm. "Tomorrow we start training," he told her. "I need you to forget everything I taught you. I need you to act like you can't understand commands. I need you to be clumsy and difficult and basically useless. Can you do that for me?" Cinder tilted her head, clearly not understanding the words, but sensing his distress. She licked his face with her warm tongue, and Walter couldn't help but smile. "We'll figure out," he said, more to himself than to her. "We always do." Outside, the three Imperial ships descended lower in the atmosphere, preparing for landing. Somewhere in those ships, inspectors were probably reviewing files on Ashwood Ridge, making lists of what to look for and what to take. They would come with their scanners and their databases and their legal authority. But Walter Grimm had something they didn't have. He had 40 years of living on this land. He had friends who would help him. And most importantly, he had a dragon who trusted him completely. Tomorrow the Empire would arrive. Tomorrow the Real fight would begin. Tonight, an old man sat by his fire with his dragon, and for a few precious hours, everything was still okay. Teaching Cinder to be stupid turned out to be harder than Walter expected. The dragon had spent 15 years learning to be helpful and responsive. Undoing all that training in just 2 days felt wrong on every level. "Sit," Walter commanded, using the same firm voice he'd always used. Cinder sat immediately. Looking up at him with pride, Walter sighed. "No, girl. You're supposed to ignore me, remember?" Cinder's head tilted in confusion. She'd been sitting on command since she was barely bigger than a cat. Not sitting didn't make sense to her. Betty arrived mid-morning with a truck full of supplies. She'd brought paint, tools, and several bags of something that smelled terrible. "What is all this?" Walter asked, helping her unload. "Evidence," Betty said with a grin. "We're going to make it look like Cinder is the worst-trained creature on this planet." They spent the afternoon staging disasters. Betty splashed paint on the barn wall to look like scorch marks from uncontrolled fire breath. They dug up part of Walter's vegetable garden and scattered the produce around to suggest Cinder had destroyed it. They even broke a few pieces of equipment and arranged them to look melted. "The Empire will expect some problems with exotic creatures," Betty explained as she worked. "But if Cinder looks like she causes more damage than she's worth, they might decide she's not worth the trouble of seizing." Old Bob showed up around noon with falsified breeding records. "According to these documents, you've been trying to domesticate local hill lizards for the past decade," he said, handing Walter a tablet. "Cinder is supposedly the 8th generation, result of selective breeding for size and heat tolerance. Complete failure as a work animal, causes property damage, refuses training. You could get in serious trouble for this, Bob," Walter said. The administrator shrugged. "I've been running this colony for 20 years. If the Empire wants to replace me, they probably will anyway. Might as well go down doing something useful." By evening, Walter's farm looked like a disaster zone. Fake damage everywhere, carefully crafted to suggest an out-of-control creature. Betty had even created complaint forms from fake neighbors, all documenting Cinder's supposed problems. "Now comes the hard part," Betty said, getting Cinder to play along. They worked through the night. Walter would give Cinder a command, and she would obey perfectly. Then Betty would gently correct her, showing her what they actually wanted. It took hours of patient repetition. "When Walter says sit, you stand," Betty explained, as if the dragon could understand complete sentences. "When he says come, you go the other way. When he says stop, you keep going." Cinder clearly hated this game. She whined and chirped in frustration, not understanding why her human suddenly wanted her to do everything wrong. But gradually, she started to catch on. Dragons were intelligent creatures, and Cinder was smarter than most. She began to understand that this was a different kind of training, one where the rules were backwards. Be why dawn the next morning, Cinder could successfully fail basic commands about half the time. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. The Imperial delegation would start inspections today. Walter dozed in his chair for a few hours while Betty kept watch. When he woke, the older woman was staring out the window at the road leading to his property. "2 vehicles heading this way," she said quietly. "Official markings." Walter's stomach dropped. Already? I thought they'd start with properties closer to town. Guess they wanted to work their way in from the edges, Betty said. She squeezed his shoulder. You've got this. Just remember the story. Stick to it no matter what. The vehicles pulled up to Walter's house, kicking up dust. Two people got out. The first was a tall man in an Imperial uniform, all sharp creases and polished buttons. His nameplate read Commissioner Aldrich Stone. The second was a woman in civilian clothes with a scanner case slung over her shoulder. She introduced herself as Dr. Petra Lang, xenobiologist. Mr. Grimm, Commissioner Stone said, not bothering with pleasantries. We're here to conduct your mandatory property inspection. This should take approximately 2 to 3 hours. Please provide full access to all buildings, equipment, and his eyes swept across the yard and landed on Cinder, who was lounging in a patch of sunlight, all biological assets. Walter nodded, keeping his expression neutral. Of course. Though I should warn you, my barn's a mess right now. Had some problems with the local wildlife. We'll be the judge of that, Stone said. He gestured to Dr. Lang. Begin scanning the perimeter. While the commissioner started examining Walter's equipment sheds, Dr. Lang approached Cinder with her scanner. The dragon watched her approach with lazy interest. Don't get too close, Walter called out. She's not friendly with strangers. Dr. Lang ignored him and continued her approach. When she was about 10 feet away, Walter gave Cinder a subtle hand signal. The dragon immediately scrambled to her feet and backed away, making uncertain growling sounds. Interesting, Dr. Lang murmured, checking her scanner readings. She's showing elevated body temperature and unusual bone density for a common hill lizard. Walter's heart hammered, but he kept his voice casual. That's from the breeding program. We've been trying to develop heat-resistant work animals. Hasn't been very successful, as you can see from the damage around the property. He pointed to the staged scorch marks on the barn. She can't control her fire output worth a damn. Nearly burned down my storage shed last month. Commissioner Stone walked over, examining the marks. These look recent. They are. Like I said, she's more trouble than she's worth. I've been considering relocating her. Actually, maybe releasing her back in the highlands where her ancestors came from. Dr. Lang pulled out a small device and aimed it at Cinder. I'd like to get a DNA sample. Be my guest, Walter said. Good luck getting close enough. The xenobiologist approached slowly, holding out a small treat. Cinder sniffed the air, clearly interested in the food. Walter tensed. This was the moment of truth. Cinder, stay, he commanded in a firm voice. The dragon immediately started walking toward Dr. Lang, ignoring his command completely. She snatched the treat, and then, instead of allowing herself to be examined, she turned and trotted away to the other side of the yard. Dr. Lang frowned. Does she always ignore commands like that? Walter threw up his hands in exasperation. Like I said, complete failure as a work animal. I've spent years trying to train her. She knows her name, and that's about it. Cinder, come, he called out. The dragon sat down and started grooming her wing. Cinder, sit, Walter tried. She stood up and walked in a circle. Commissioner Stone watched this display with barely concealed amusement. I see what you mean. Still, Dr. Lang, continue your examination. Even untrained specimens can have value. Over the next hour, Dr. Lang tried repeatedly to get close enough to Cinder for a proper scan. Each time, the dragon either wandered away or did something unexpected. Once she accidentally knocked over a bucket with her tail, spilling water everywhere. Another time, she tried to eat a tool that Dr. Lang had set down. She's got the intelligence of a brick, Dr. Lang muttered in frustration. Walter had to suppress a smile. Cinder was playing her part perfectly now, acting like the most incompetent creature in the galaxy. Finally, Dr. Lang managed to grab a scale sample when Cinder got distracted by a butterfly. She ran it through her portable analyzer while Commissioner Stone finished cataloging the rest of the property. Walter held his breath, waiting for the results. If the DNA came back flagged as a rare species, all his preparation would be worthless. Dr. Lang stared at her device, frowning. That's odd. Problem? Stone asked. The genetic markers are showing some unusual patterns. Could be environmental adaptation, or it could be, she paused, something else. I need to run more comprehensive tests back at the lab. Stone checked his schedule. We have 14 more properties to inspect today. How valuable would you estimate this specimen to be? Dr. Lang looked at Cinder, who was now trying to dig a hole in Walter's yard for no apparent reason. Based on behavior and preliminary scans, limited value. The genetic anomalies might be interesting for research, but given the creature's lack of trainability and apparent low intelligence, the cost of transport and care would likely exceed any research benefit. Mark it down as local variant, minimal Imperial interest, Stone said, already moving toward his vehicle. We're behind schedule. Dr. Lang hesitated, looking between her scanner and Cinder. For a moment, Walter thought she was going to protest. Then she shook her head and packed up her equipment. Mr. Grimm, you're cleared for now, Commissioner Stone said. You'll receive official documentation within 3 days. Continue normal operations. Walter nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He watched the two vehicles drive away, dust trailing behind them. Only when they disappeared from view did he allow himself to breathe. Betty emerged from where she'd been hiding in the barn. That was too close. It worked, though, Walter said, still not quite believing it. They bought it. Cinder trotted over. All her fake stupidity vanished. She pressed against Walter's leg, looking up at him for approval. Good girl, he whispered, scratching her head. You did so good. 1 week passed. Then 2. Walter started to believe they'd actually gotten away with it. The Empire had set up permanent offices in New Haven, and Imperial administrators walked the streets like they owned the place, which legally they did now. The integration was proceeding exactly as everyone feared. New taxes were announced, new regulations, new restrictions on what colonists could grow, make, or sell, but no one came back to Walter's farm. His clearance papers arrived on schedule, stamped and official. According to the Empire's records, his property contained nothing of special interest. Life returned to something resembling normal. Then Dr. Lang came back. Walter was replacing shingles on his roof when he spotted the vehicle approaching. His stomach sank when he recognized the Imperial markings. This time Dr. Lang arrived alone, without Commissioner Stone or any official escort. He climbed down the ladder slowly, buying time to think. Cinder was in the barn, hopefully out of sight. Maybe the xenobiologist was just doing follow-up paperwork. Maybe this was routine, but the look on Dr. Lang's face told him otherwise. Mr. Grimm, she said, getting out of her vehicle. We need to talk. About what? Walter kept his voice neutral. About your dragon. The word hung in the air between them. Not creature, not specimen, dragon. She knew Doctor. Lang saw his expression and held up her hands. I'm not here in an official capacity. I came alone. No recording equipment, no backup. I need you to hear me out before you do anything rash. Walter's hand moved slightly toward the rifle he kept by his front door. I am listening. Can we talk inside? This needs to stay private. Against his better judgment, Walter led her into his house. Cinder was indeed in the barn, but he could hear her moving around. Dr. Lang heard it too. They sat at Walter's kitchen table. The xenobiologist pulled out a tablet and showed him a series of genetic charts and data readouts. These are the results from Cinder's DNA sample, she said. I've run them through every database the Empire has access to. Your dragon isn't a hill lizard variant. She's not even from a known species in this sector. Then what is she? Walter asked, though he suspected he already knew. Volcanic HFY, thought to be extinct for over 200 years. The last confirmed specimen was captured on a planet 3 systems away and sold to a private collector for 8 million credits. Dr. Lang met his eyes. Do you understand what that means? It means you're here to take her. No, Dr. Lang said firmly. It means I'm here to warn you. I falsified my initial report. I listed Cinder as a common variant with minimal value. But that won't hold up to scrutiny. If anyone else examines my data, if anyone runs a proper genetic analysis, they'll know what she really is. Walter leaned back in his chair, studying the woman across from him. Why would you falsify a report? You work for the Empire. I do, and I hate it. Dr. Lang's voice was bitter. I became a xenobiologist because I wanted to study and protect rare species. Instead, I spend my time cataloging creatures so the Empire can exploit them. Do you know what happens to rare specimens once we seize them? I can guess. They disappear into Imperial research facilities or private collections. Most die within a few years. The Empire doesn't care about preservation or conservation. They care about profit and prestige. She ran a hand through her hair. I grew up on a frontier colony like this one. I had a pet, something small and harmless that my family had raised from birth. When the Empire integrated our world, they took him for study. I never saw him again. I was 9 years old. Walter felt a surge of sympathy for the woman, but he kept his guard up. That still doesn't explain why you're here. Because Commissioner Stone is coming back. He wasn't satisfied with our initial survey. He's ordering a second inspection of all properties that showed any genetic anomalies. That includes your farm. He'll be here in 2 days, and this time he's bringing a full xenobiology team with military-grade scanners. There's no way your dragon can fool them. The words hit Walter like a physical blow. 2 days. After everything they'd done, everything they'd risked, they still had 2 days. What are my options? He asked quietly to Doctor. Lang hesitated. Officially? None. The moment Stone confirms what Cinder is, she becomes property of the sovereign mandate. Any attempt to hide her or interfere with her seizure will be considered a criminal act. And unofficially, run, take Cinder and disappear into the highlands. There are places up there where scanners don't work properly because of the volcanic interference. You could hide for months, maybe years. Walter laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm 73 years old. I can barely make it up a flight of stairs without my knees screaming. How am I supposed to survive in the wilderness? I don't know, Dr. Lang admitted, but it's better than watching them take her. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, Cinder made a questioning chirp from the barn, sensing that something was wrong. There might be another way, Dr. Lang said slowly. It's risky and might not work, but it's something. I'm listening. The Empire's exotic species registry has certain requirements for seizure. The creature has to be positively identified, confirmed to be the rare species in question, and verified as being in good health and suitable for transport. If any of those criteria aren't met, seizure can be delayed pending further review. How does that help us? Dr. Lang leaned forward. What if Cinder wasn't in good health when Stone arrives? What if she showed signs of a degenerative condition that made her unsuitable for transport? The Empire wouldn't waste resources seizing a sick animal that might die before reaching a research facility. Walter understood immediately. You want to fake an illness. More than that, I want to create medical documentation showing that Cinder has a chronic condition that significantly reduces her life expectancy and value. With the right paperwork and the right symptoms, we might be able to convince Stone that she's not worth the effort. Can you do that? Create fake medical records. I can try, but I need your help. I need to examine Cinder properly, run real tests so the fake results look authentic. And I need you to trust me, which I know is asking a lot. Walter looked at the woman across from him. She'd already stuck her neck out once by falsifying the initial report. If she got caught helping him now, she'd lose her job at minimum, possibly face criminal charges. She had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Why are you doing this? He asked. Really? Dr. Lang was quiet for a long moment. Because I'm tired of being part of the problem. Because every creature the Empire takes, every world they integrate, every life they disrupt, I'm complicit. I can't stop the sovereign mandate, but maybe I can save one dragon. Maybe that counts for something. Walter made his decision. Cinder's in the barn. I'll introduce you properly. They walked across the yard together. When Walter opened the barn door, Cinder was waiting, her head raised in alert curiosity. She saw Dr. Lang and immediately moved to put herself between the stranger and Walter. Easy girl, Walter said softly. She's a friend. I know she fooled you last time, but things are different now. He knelt down next to Cinder and scratched her favorite spot behind her ear ridges. This lady is going to help us. She needs to run some tests, take some measurements. It might be uncomfortable, but I need you to let her do it. Can you do that for me? Cinder looked from Walter to Dr. Lang and back again. Dragons might not understand all human words, but they understood tone and intention. After a moment, She relaxed slightly and allowed Dr. Lang to approach. The xenobiologist moved slowly, speaking in a calm voice. "Hello, Cinder. You're even more beautiful up close, and much smarter than I gave you credit for during that first visit." She pulled out her scanner and began a proper examination. Cinder stood still, though her muscles remained tense and ready to react. Walter stayed close, one hand on the dragon's shoulder, providing reassurance. "Her vitals are perfect," Dr. Lang said after several minutes. "Excellent lung capacity, strong cardiovascular system, no signs of malnutrition or disease. She's in better health than most domesticated creatures I've examined." That's good, right? For her, yes. For our plan, it makes things harder. We need her to appear sick without actually harming her. Dr. Lang pulled up a data file on her tablet. There's a condition that affects some reptilian species called thermal dysregulation syndrome. It causes erratic body temperature and reduced fire control. The symptoms can be faked with the right preparation. They spent the next hour going over details. Dr. Lang would create falsified medical scans showing cellular degradation in Cinder's heat glands. They'd stage symptoms: irregular fire output, apparent weakness, loss of appetite. Walter would need to train Cinder to act sick when the inspectors arrived. "It's not foolproof," Dr. Lang warned. "If Stone brings a medical specialist, they might see through it." "It's better than nothing," Walter said. "We'll make it work." Dr. Lang packed up her equipment and prepared to leave. At the door, she turned back. "Mr. Grimm, if this goes wrong, if they figure out what we're doing, we'll both face serious consequences." "I know. Thank you for taking that risk." She smiled sadly. "Thank that 9-year-old girl who lost her pet. I'm doing this for her." 2 days felt like 2 hours. Walter barely slept, spending every moment preparing for Commissioner Stone's return. Dr. Lang had provided detailed instructions for faking Cinder's illness, but actually implementing them proved challenging. "You need to breathe fire unevenly," Walter explained to Cinder for the 100th time. "Make it flicker and sputter, like you can't control it properly." Cinder tried her best, producing a weak flame that died out quickly. But Walter could tell she was struggling with the concept. Her natural instinct was to breathe fire smoothly and consistently. Going against that training felt wrong to her. Betty stopped by late on the first night with more falsified documentation. "Old Bob managed to backdate some veterinary records," she said, handing Walter a thick folder. "According to these, Cinder's been showing symptoms of thermal dysregulation for the past 6 months. You've been treating her with medication that isn't working." Walter flipped through the papers. The level of detail was impressive. Treatment logs, medication schedules, even notes from fake vet visits. How did Bob manage all this? He used to work in colonial administration before coming to Ashwood Ridge. Knows every bureaucratic trick in the book. Betty sat down heavily in a kitchen chair. "The whole town's talking, Walter. Word got out that the Empire's coming back to inspect your place specifically. People are worried about what it means. It means they're not as stupid as we hoped. Some folks are saying you should just let them take Cinder. That fighting the Empire is pointless." Betty's jaw tightened. "I told them they could go to hell." Despite everything, Walter smiled. "Thanks, Betty. Don't mention it. Just make sure you and that dragon come through this okay. We've already lost too much to these Imperial bastards." The morning of the inspection arrived too quickly. Walter stood in his yard at dawn, watching the convoy approach. 3 vehicles this time, not 2. Commissioner Stone was taking this seriously. Stone emerged from the lead vehicle, followed by Dr. Lang and 2 other people Walter didn't recognize. One was a man in a medical uniform carrying advanced scanning equipment. The other was a woman with military insignia, probably security in case things went badly. "Mr. Grimm," Stone said, his tone colder than during the first visit. "Thank you for your cooperation. This is Dr. Richard Hayes, our senior medical specialist, and Captain Lisa Ford from security. We'll be conducting a comprehensive re-examination of your property, with particular attention to the creature you call Cinder." Walter nodded, trying to look concerned but cooperative. "Of course. Though I should mention, Cinder hasn't been doing well lately. She's been sick for months now." Stone's eyes narrowed. "Sick how?" "Some kind of thermal regulation problem. Can't control her fire properly, loses body heat at random times, barely eats anymore. I've been trying to treat her, but nothing seems to help. Dr. Hayes stepped forward. I'll need to examine her immediately. Where is the creature now? In the barn. She's been sleeping a lot lately. They walked across the yard, the whole group following. Walter's heart pounded so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. Everything depended on the next hour. If Cinder couldn't maintain the act, if the doctors saw through the fake illness, it was over. He opened the barn door. Inside, Cinder lay on a pile of hay, her movements slow and lethargic. She'd been practicing this for 2 days, and the performance was convincing. She lifted her head weakly when they entered, then let it drop back down as if exhausted. She's declined significantly since last week, Dr. Lang said, pulling out her scanner. To anyone listening, she sounded professionally concerned. To Walter, who'd spent hours preparing with her, the words were a scripted warning. Everything had to match the timeline they'd created. Dr. Hayes moved in with his equipment, more sophisticated than anything Dr. Lang had carried. He ran multiple scans while Walter held his breath. Cinder remained still, occasionally releasing a weak puff of smoke that dissipated quickly. Body temperature is fluctuating, Hayes reported. Readings are inconsistent with normal volcanic WIRM physiology. Stone leaned in. So, it is a volcanic WIRM. I knew it. Genetically, yes, Dr. Lang confirmed, sticking to the truth where it mattered. But one suffering from severe thermal dysregulation syndrome. Look at these cellular scans. The heat glands are deteriorating. Hayes studied his own scanner, frowning. The deterioration does appear consistent with TDS. How long has she shown symptoms? According to Mr. Grimm's veterinary records, approximately 6 months, Dr. Lang said, producing the fake documentation Betty had provided. Hayes reviewed the papers carefully. Walter tried not to sweat visibly. If the doctor spotted any inconsistencies in the records, any detail that didn't match up, the whole deception would collapse. Mr. Grimm, Hayes said finally, have you tried cortical suppressants? Walter blinked. That specific medication wasn't mentioned in any of the fake records. Dr. Lang hadn't prepared him for technical questions. The local vet didn't have access to those, he stammered. We tried what we could with available supplies. Understandable for a frontier colony, Hayes said, making notes. Still, with proper treatment, this condition might be manageable. Stone crossed his arms. How manageable? Is this specimen worth seizing or not? This was the critical moment. Dr. Hayes would decide Cinder's fate with his next words. That's difficult to say, Commissioner. Volcanic WIRMS are extremely rare, which makes this specimen valuable in theory. However, thermal dysregulation syndrome is progressive and usually fatal. Even with advanced treatment, survival rates are less than 30%. Transportation stress would likely accelerate the decline. What's your recommendation? Hayes was quiet for a long moment, examining Cinder from different angles. The dragon played her part perfectly, breathing shallowly and keeping her eyes half closed. She looked like a creature on the edge of death. From a medical standpoint, seizing the specimen would be high risk with limited reward. The cost of transport and treatment would be substantial, with a strong probability that the creature dies before reaching a research facility. The Empire would be better served waiting for a healthier specimen to be discovered. Stone looked frustrated. Dr. Lang, do you agree with this assessment? Ido, Commissioner. Much as I'd like to study a living volcanic WIRM, taking this one would likely result in her death and wasted Imperial resources. Stone turned to Captain Ford. What about keeping her here under Imperial supervision? We could assign a handler and medical team to monitor her condition. Ford shook her head. Sir, we're stretched thin already. Every colony world is demanding personnel. Dedicating resources to babysit one sick creature doesn't seem like an efficient use of our forces. Walter could see Stone wrestling with the decision. The commissioner clearly suspected something wasn't quite right, but he had no proof of deception. Every expert was telling him Cinder wasn't worth the trouble. Fine, Stone said finally, the word coming out like he was chewing glass. Mark the specimen as viable but low priority due to medical concerns. We'll leave her here for now. If her condition improves, we'll revisit the matter." Walter nearly collapsed with relief. He managed to keep his expression neutral, concerned but accepting. "I understand," he said. "I'll continue treating her as best I can." Stone's eyes bored into him. "See that you do, Mr. Grimm. And if there's any change in her condition, any improvement at all, you're required to report it immediately. Failure to do so would be considered concealment of Imperial assets." Of course. The inspection team spent another hour examining the rest of Walter's property, but their hearts weren't in it. They'd come for a dragon and were leaving empty-handed. Stone was particularly sullen as they prepared to depart. Doctor Lang lingered behind for a moment, pretending to pack up her equipment. She leaned close to Walter and whispered, "This bought you time, nothing more. Stone won't forget about Cinder. Be ready for him to come back. How long do we have? Weeks if you're lucky. Days if you're not." Then she was gone, following the others to their vehicles. Walter watched them drive away, his legs suddenly weak. He sat down on a hay bale next to Cinder, who immediately perked up and nuzzled his hand. "You did so good, girl," he said, his voice shaking. "So good." Betty appeared in the barn doorway. "They're gone. For now. Then we need to talk about what happens next. Because Stone isn't going to let this go." Walter looked at his dragon, at the creature who'd kept him company through the loneliest years of his life. He thought about running to the highlands, about spending his final years hiding in volcanic caves. He thought about standing his ground and fighting when Stone inevitably returned. But mostly, he thought about the fact that he'd just won a battle against an empire, even if only temporarily. An old man and his dragon had outsmarted Imperial bureaucrats and medical specialists. They'd faked an illness so convincingly that experts believed it, that if they could do that, maybe they could do more. "Betty," Walter said slowly, "how many people in this colony do you think would stand with us if things get worse?" Betty smiled, a fierce expression that reminded Walter why she'd been a militia captain. "All of them, Walter. Every single one." 3 weeks of peace felt like a gift Walter didn't deserve. He kept waiting for Stone to return, for Imperial soldiers to surround his farm, for the whole careful deception to fall apart. Instead, life went on. Cinder recovered from her fake illness and went back to helping around the property. The vegetables grew. The sun rose and set, but tension simmered beneath the surface. The Empire's integration of Ashwood Ridge was accelerating. More regulations arrived every week. Higher taxes, mandatory quotas on farm production, Imperial personnel taking over key infrastructure. The colony that had been independent for 40 years was becoming just another piece of the sovereign mandate. People were getting angry. Walter was in town buying supplies when he saw the crowd gathering in the main square. At least 50 colonists, maybe more, listening to someone speak from the steps of the old colony administration building. He moved closer and recognized the speaker as David Park, a young farmer whose family had lost their land to Imperial seizure. "They take and take and take," David was saying, his voice rising. "First our freedom, then our resources, now our homes. When does it stop? When is enough enough?" The crowd murmured agreement. Walter saw familiar faces, people he'd known for decades. They all wore the same expression, frustration reaching a breaking point. "We should organize," someone shouted. "Show them we're not going to just roll over." Betty appeared at Walter's elbow. "This could get ugly fast. Stone has security forces stationed all over town. If this protest turns violent, people will get hurt." Walter was about to respond when he saw them. A squad of Imperial security officers moving toward the square, hands on their weapons. Captain Ford led them, her face set in hard lines. The crowd saw them too. The mood shifted from angry to dangerous. Some colonists started picking up rocks, pieces of broken pavement, anything that could be used as a weapon. "Everyone disperse now," Ford ordered through a loudspeaker. "This gathering is in violation of Imperial assembly regulations. You have 2 minutes to clear the area." "This is our town," David shouted back. "We have a right to gather peacefully. You have no rights except those granted by the sovereign mandate." 1 minute 30 seconds. Walter felt the moment balancing on a knife's edge. One wrong move, one thrown rock, one nervous security officer pulling a trigger, and this would explode into violence that would give the Empire an excuse to crack down even harder. He stepped forward before he could think better of it. "Everyone calm down," he called out, his voice carrying across the square. Years of giving orders in combat engineering gave him a tone that made people listen. "This isn't the way." David turned to him. "Mr. Grimm? What are you doing?" "Trying to stop you from making a mistake that'll get people killed." Walter walked into the space between the crowd and the security forces. "Captain Ford, these folks are angry and scared. That's not a crime. Give them a chance to voice their concerns properly." Ford studied him coldly. "They have official channels for complaints. Channels that ignore everything we say. You know it, and I know it. Step aside, old man. This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us," Walter said firmly. He turned to address the crowd. "I know you're frustrated. I know the Empire has taken things from you, made your lives harder. I'm living it too. But starting a fight you can't win isn't bravery, it's suicide. The Empire wants an excuse to bring in more troops, more restrictions. Don't give it to them. So we just accept everything," someone yelled. "Let them walk all over us." "No, we fight smart. We use the system against them, find the cracks in their laws, protect what we can. Change doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens slowly through persistence and community." The crowd was listening now, the immediate anger diffusing slightly. Walter pressed his advantage. "Go home. Be with your families. Tomorrow we can organize properly, figure out legal ways to push back. But today, right now, all you'll accomplish is giving the Empire an excuse to hurt you." For a long moment, no one moved. Then old Bob stepped forward from the crowd. "Walter's right," he said. "I've been reviewing Imperial integration law. There are appeals processes, legal challenges we can file. It's boring paperwork, but it's safer than this." Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse. David Park looked like he wanted to argue, but Betty put a hand on his shoulder and guided him away. Within minutes, the square was empty except for Walter, the security forces, and Captain Ford. "That was smart," Ford said. "Prevented bloodshed. You planning to thank me?" "No. You should know Commissioner Stone has been watching you. He doesn't believe your dragon is as sick as our medical reports claim." Walter's stomach clenched. "Has he found any evidence of that?" "Not yet, but he's looking. And when Stone wants to find something, he usually does." Ford turned to leave, then paused. "Fair warning, Mr. Grimm. The Empire doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. Eventually, it always wins." Walter watched her go, those words echoing in his mind. Eventually, it always wins. That he went home and found Cinder waiting for him, healthy and strong. She chirped happily at his return, completely unaware of the danger still circling them. Walter sat on his porch, the dragon curled at his feet, and thought about what came next. Betty and old Bob arrived as the sun was setting. "Half the town wants to make you their leader now," Betty said, sitting down beside him. "You talked down an angry mob without a shot being fired. I'm not anyone's leader. I'm just an old man trying to protect his dragon." "Maybe that's exactly what people need right now," old Bob said. "Someone who's not trying to start a revolution, just trying to hold on to what matters." Walter was quiet for a moment. "Dr. Lang warned me Stone would come back eventually. We can keep faking Cinder's illness for a while, but sooner or later he'll bring specialists who'll see through it. Or he'll just decide to seize her anyway, sick or not." "So what do we do?" Betty asked. "I've been thinking about that. The Empire's integration is legal, technically. They follow their own laws, follow the proper documents, make everything official. That's their strength, but it's also their weakness." Old Bob leaned forward. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we make Cinder's case public. Really public. Not just on Ashwood Ridge, but across the frontier territories. We document everything. How the Empire targets rare creatures, how they seize property under questionable legal grounds, how their integration destroys local communities. We make this about more than one dragon. We make it about how empires operate. That would require getting information off-world," Betty said. "Imperial communications are monitored. Then we use non-imperial channels. There are independent news services, frontier networks the Empire hasn't fully controlled yet. We tell our story, show what's happening here. If enough people see it, it becomes harder for Stone to just make Cinder disappear. Old Bob nodded slowly. It could work. Make this a political problem instead of just a legal one. The Empire hates bad publicity. They spent the evening planning. Old Bob would reach out to contacts in other colonies, people who'd gone through similar integration experiences. Betty would gather documentation of every Imperial overreach on Ashwood Ridge. Walter would work with Dr. Lang to create a detailed case file about Cinder, showing how the Empire classified sentient creatures as property. Over the next 2 weeks, their network grew. Colonists from a dozen different worlds contributed stories, evidence, legal arguments. Dr. Lang risked her career by providing internal Imperial documents showing how rare species were exploited. Everything was compiled into a comprehensive report that painted a damning picture of the Sovereign Mandate's practices. Then they sent it everywhere. Independent news services, frontier advocacy groups, academic institutions, even politicians in sectors where the Empire's control was weaker. The story spread faster than anyone expected. Within days, Ashwood Ridge's integration became a symbol. News broadcasts showed images of Walter with Cinder, an old man trying to protect his companion from an overwhelming empire. Opinion pieces questioned the ethics of seizing sentient creatures. Legal scholars debated whether the Empire's exotic species laws violated basic rights. The Sovereign Mandate tried to control the narrative, but the damage was done. What had been a quiet integration on a backwater colony was now a public relations nightmare. Commissioner Stone showed up at Walter's farm one final time, his expression darker than a thunderstorm. "You've made things very difficult, Mr. Grimm," he said. "Just exercising my right to free speech." Walter replied calmly. "Rights that exist only within Imperial law. You're pushing boundaries. Maybe boundaries need pushing." Stone stared at Cinder, who stood protectively next to Walter. "Orders came from high up. I'm to leave your dragon alone, at least for now. The Empire doesn't want the negative attention her seizure would generate. You've won this round, but not the war. Wars between citizens and empires only end one way, Mr. Grimm. We're patient. We can wait. Eventually, people will forget about your dragon. The news cycle will move on, and when it does, we'll be back. Then I'll be here waiting." Stone left without another word. Walter stood in his yard, watching the Imperial vehicle disappear, and felt both victory and exhaustion. They bought time, maybe months or even years. But Betty's question from weeks ago still hung in the air. What happens next? That evening, Walter received a message from an unexpected source. Other colonies were organizing, forming networks to share information and support each other against Imperial overreach. They wanted Walter to join them, to help coordinate resistance across multiple worlds. "I'm too old for this," he told Cinder, showing her the message even though she couldn't read. "I just wanted to keep you safe. I didn't want to start a movement." But the dragon just looked at him with those intelligent eyes, and Walter understood. Sometimes you don't choose your role in history. Sometimes it chooses you. An old man protecting his dragon had become a symbol of something larger. Ordinary people standing up to extraordinary power. Walter Grimm sent his reply that night. Yes, he would help coordinate. Yes, he would share what he'd learned. Yes, he would keep fighting, not just for Cinder, but for everyone who'd ever lost something precious to forces beyond their control. The fire in his stove burned warm, kept alive by a small dragon who'd changed everything. Outside, the stars hung bright over Ashwood Ridge. Somewhere out there, the Sovereign Mandate plotted its next move. But here, in a farmhouse on the edge of nowhere, an old man and his companions prepared for tomorrow. The Empire might be patient, but so was Walter. And he had something they didn't, a reason to fight that went beyond laws and profits and territory. He had family. He had community. He had love. That, in the end, would always be stronger than any empire. Cinder curled up by the fire, keeping it warm, while Walter sat his chair and planned for a future where creatures like her weren't classified as property. The fight was far from over. But for tonight, they were together, they were safe, and that was enough.